Mandarin is a group of related varieties of Chinese spoken across most of northern and southwestern China. Because most Mandarin dialects are found in the north, the group is also referred to as the northern dialect, s. When the Mandarin group is taken as one language, as is often done in academic literature, it has more native speakers than any other language. A northeastern dialect speaker and a southwestern dialect speaker may have difficulty communicating except through the standard language. Nonetheless, there is much less variation across the huge Mandarin area than between the non-Mandarin varieties of southeast China. This is attributed to the greater ease of travel and communication in the North China Plain compared to the more mountainous south, combined with a relatively recent spread of Mandarin to frontier areas. For most of Chinese history, the capital has been within the Mandarin area, making these dialects very influential. Since the 14th century, some form of Mandarin has served as a national lingua franca. In the early 20th century, a standard form based on the Beijing dialect, with elements from other Mandarin dialects, was adopted as the national language. Standard Chinese, which is also referred to as Mandarin, is the official language of the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China and one of the 4 official languages of Singapore. It is also one of the most frequently used varieties of Chinese among Chinese diaspora communities internationally. Name: the English word Mandarin originally meant an official of the Chinese Empire. Since their home dialects were varied and often mutually unintelligible, these officials communicated using a coin copyright based on various northern dialects. When Jesuit missionaries learned this standard language in the 16th century, they called it Mandarin, from its Chinese name Guānhuà, or language of the officials. In everyday English, Mandarin refers to Standard Chinese, which is often called simply Chinese. Standard Chinese is based on the particular Mandarin dialect spoken in Beijing, with some lexical and syntactic influence from other Mandarin dialects. It is the official spoken language of the People's Republic of China, the official language of the Republic of China, and one of the 4 official languages of the Republic of Singapore. It also functions as the language of instruction in the PRC and in Taiwan. It is one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations, under the name Chinese. Chinese speakers refer to the modern standard language as PC Tanhua on the mainland, Guāqdig in Taiwan, or Huayok in Malaysia and Singapore, but not as Guānhuà. This article uses the term Mandarin in the sense used by linguists, referring to the diverse group of dialects spoken in northern and southwestern China, which Chinese linguists call Guānhuà. The alternative term Pinyin, or northern dialect, s, is used less and less among Chinese linguists. By extension, the term Old Mandarin is used by linguists to refer to the northern dialects recorded in materials from the Yuan dynasty. Native speakers who are not academic linguists may not recognize that the variants they speak are classified in linguistics as members of Mandarin in a broader sense. Within Chinese social or cultural discourse, there is not a common Mandarin identity based on language. Rather, there are strong regional identities centered on individual dialects because of the wide geographical distribution and cultural diversity of their speakers. Speakers of forms of Mandarin other than the standard typically refer to the variety they speak by a geographic name, for example Sichuan dialect, Hebei dialect or northeastern dialect, all being regarded as distinct from the standard language. As with all other varieties of the Chinese language, there is significant dispute as to whether Mandarin is a language or a dialect. See Varieties of Chinese for more on this issue. History: the present Chinese language varieties developed from regional variants of Old Chinese and Middle Chinese. Traditionally, 7 major groups of dialects have been recognized. Aside from Mandarin, the other 6 are Wu, Gan and Xiang in central China, and Min, Hakka and Yu on the southeast coast. More recently, other more specific groups have been recognized. Old Mandarin. After the fall of the Northern Song dynasty, and during the reign of the Jin and Yuan dynasties in northern China, a common speech developed based on the dialects of the North China Plain around the capital, a language referred to as Old Mandarin. New genres of vernacular literature were based on this language, including verse, drama and story forms, such as the ka and san ka. The rhyming conventions of the new verse were codified in a rhyme dictionary called the Zhongyi Yuan Yin Yun. A radical departure from the rhyme table tradition that had evolved over the previous centuries, this dictionary contains a wealth of information on the phonology of Old Mandarin. Further sources are the Phags-Pa script based on the Tibetan alphabet, which was used to write several of the languages of the Mongol Empire, including Chinese, and the Mengazai Yun, a rhyme dictionary based on Phags-Pa. The rhyme books differ in some details, but overall show many of the features characteristic of modern Mandarin dialects, such as the reduction and disappearance of final plosives and the reorganization of the Middle Chinese tones. In Middle Chinese, initial plosives and affricates showed a three-way contrast between tenui, voiceless aspirated and voiced consonants. There were four tones, with the fourth, or entering tone, comprising syllables ending in plosives. Syllables with voiced initials tended to be pronounced with a lower pitch, and by the late Tang dynasty, each of the tones had split into two registers conditioned by the initials. When voicing was lost in all dialects except the Wu group, this distinction became phonemic, and the system of initials and tones was rearranged differently in each of the major groups. The Zhongyi Yuan Yin Yun shows the typical Mandarin four-tone system resulting from a split of the even tone and loss of the entering tone, with its syllables distributed across the other tones. Similarly, voiced plosives and affricates have become voiceless aspirates in the even tone and voiceless non-aspirates in others, another distinctive Mandarin development. However, the language still retained a final M, which is merged with N in modern dialects, and initial voiced fricatives. It also retained the distinction between velars and alveolar sibilants in palatal environments, which later merged in most Mandarin dialects to yield a palatal series. The flourishing vernacular literature of the period also shows distinctively Mandarin vocabulary and syntax, though some, such as the third-person pronoun ta, can be traced back to the Tang dynasty. Vernacular literature, until the early 20th century, formal writing and even much poetry and fiction was done in literary Chinese, which was modeled on the classics of the Warring States period and Han Dynasty. Over time, the various spoken varieties diverged greatly from literary Chinese, which was learned and composed as a special language. Preserved from the sound changes that affected the various spoken varieties, its economy of expression was greatly valued. For instance, C1/4 is unambiguous in written Chinese, but has over 75 homophones in spoken Mandarin. The literary language was less appropriate for recording materials that were meant to be reproduced in oral presentations, materials such as plays and grist for the professional storyteller's mill. From at least the Yuan dynasty, plays that recounted the subversive tales of China's Robin Hoods to the Ming dynasty novels such as Water Margin, on down to the Qing dynasty novel Dream of the Red Chamber and beyond, there developed a literature in written vernacular Chinese. In many cases, this written language reflected Mandarin varieties, and since pronunciation differences were not conveyed in this written form, this tradition had a unifying force across all the Mandarin-speaking regions and beyond. Hu Shi, a pivotal figure of the first half of the 20th century, wrote an influential and perceptive study of this literary tradition, entitled Guānhuà Copyright NXUA Copyright SHC. Coin a copyright of the late empire. The Chinese have different languages in different provinces, to such an extent that they cannot understand each other. They also have another language which is like a universal and common language. This is the official language of the Mandarins and of the court. It is among them like Latin among ourselves. Two of our fathers, Michel Ruggieri and Matteo Ricci, have been learning this Mandarin language. Alessandro Valagnano, Historia del Principio y Progreso de la Compare de Jesus en las Indias Orientales. Until the mid-20th century, most Chinese people living in many parts of southern China spoke only their local language. As a practical measure, officials of the Ming and Qing dynasties carried out the administration of the empire using a common language based on Mandarin varieties, known as Guānhuà. Knowledge of this language was thus essential for an official career, but it was never formally defined. Officials varied widely in their pronunciation. In 1728, The Yunzheng emperor, unable to understand the accents of officials from Guangdong and Fujian, issued a decree requiring the governors of those provinces to provide for the teaching of proper pronunciation. Although the resulting academies for correct pronunciation were short-lived, the decree did spawn a number of textbooks that give some insight into the ideal pronunciation. Common features included, loss of the Middle Chinese voiced initials except for V, merger of M finals with N, the characteristic Mandarin four-tone system in open syllables, but retaining a final glottal stop in entering tone syllables, retention of the distinction between palatalized velars and dental affricates, the source of the spellings Peking, and Tianjin for modern Beijing, and Tianjin. As the last two of these features indicate, this language was a Koine copyright based on dialects spoken in the Nanjing area, though not identical to any single dialect. This form remained prestigious long after the capital moved to Beijing in 1421, though the speech of the new capital emerged as a rival standard. As late as 1815, Robert Morrison based the first English-Euro-Chinese dictionary on this Koine copyright as the standard of the time, though he conceded that the Beijing dialect was gaining an influence. By the middle of the 19th century, the Beijing dialect had become dominant and was essential for any business with the imperial court. Standard Chinese. In the early years of the Republic of China, intellectuals of the New Culture movement, such as Hu Xi and Chen Duxiu, successfully campaigned for the replacement of literary Chinese as the written standard by written vernacular Chinese, which was based on northern dialects. A parallel priority was the definition of a standard national language. After much dispute between proponents of northern and southern dialects and an abortive attempt at an artificial pronunciation, the National Language Unification Commission finally settled on the Beijing dialect in 1932. The People's Republic founded in 1949 retained this standard, calling it PC Guānhuà. The national language is now used in education, the media, and formal situations in both the PRC and the ROC. This standard can now be spoken intelligibly by most younger people in mainland China and Taiwan, with various regional accents. In Hong Kong and Macau, because of their colonial and linguistic history, the language of education, the media, formal speech and everyday life remains the local Cantonese, although the standard language is now very influential and taught in schools. In Mandarin-speaking areas such as Sichuan, the local dialect is the mother tongue of most of the population. The era of mass education in Standard Chinese has not erased these regional differences, and people may be either diglossic or speak the standard language with a notable accent. From an official point of view, the PRC and ROC governments maintain their own forms of the standard under different names. Technically, both PC Guānhuà and Guānhuà base their phonology on the Beijing accent, though PC Guānhuà also takes some elements from other sources. Comparison of dictionaries produced in the two areas will show that there are few substantial differences. However, both versions of school standard Chinese are often quite different from the Mandarin dialects that are spoken in accordance with regional habits, and neither is wholly identical to the Beijing dialect. PC Guānhuà and Guānhuà also have some differences from the Beijing dialect in vocabulary, grammar, and pragmatics. The written forms of Standard Chinese are also essentially equivalent, although simplified characters are used in mainland China, Malaysia and Singapore, while people in Taiwan, Macau and Hong Kong generally use traditional characters. Geographic distribution and dialects. Most Han Chinese living in northern and southwestern China are native speakers of a dialect of Mandarin. The North China Plain provided few barriers to migration, leading to relative linguistic homogeneity over a wide area in northern China. In contrast, the mountains and rivers of southern China have spawned the other 6 major groups of Chinese dialects, with great internal diversity, particularly in Fujian. However, the varieties of Mandarin cover a huge area containing nearly 1 billion people. As a result, there are pronounced regional variations in pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar, and many Mandarin varieties are not mutually intelligible. Most of northeastern China, except for Liaoning, did not receive significant settlements by Han Chinese until the 18th century. and as a result the northeastern Mandarin dialects spoken there differ little from Beijing Mandarin. The Manchu people of the area now speak these dialects exclusively. The frontier areas of northwest and southwest China were colonized by speakers of Mandarin dialects at the same time, and the dialects in those areas similarly closely resemble their relatives in the core Mandarin area. However, long-established cities even very close to Beijing, such as Tianjin, Beijing, Shenyang, and Dalian, have markedly different dialects. Unlike their compatriots on the southeast coast, few speakers of Mandarin dialects emigrated from China until the late 20th century, but there are now significant communities of them in cities across the world. Classification. The classification of Chinese dialects evolved during the 20th century, and many points remain unsettled. Early classifications tend to follow provincial boundaries or major geographical features. In 1936, Wang Li produced the first classification based on phonetic criteria, principally the evolution of Middle Chinese voiced initials. His Guānhuà group included dialects of northern and southwestern China, as well as those of Hunan and northern Jiangxi. Li Fangqi's classification of 1937 distinguished the latter two groups as Xiang and Gan, while splitting the remaining Guānhuà into northern, Lower Yangtze and southwestern Guānhuà groups. The widely accepted seven-group classification of Guānhuà in 1960 kept Xiang and Gan separate, with Mandarin divided into northern, northwestern, southwestern and Jianggrade dialects. The linguist Li Rong proposed that the northwestern dialects of Shaanxi and neighboring areas that retain a final glottal stop in the Middle Chinese entering tone category should constitute a separate top-level group called Jin. He used this classification in the Language Atlas of China. Many other linguists continue to include these dialects in the Mandarin group, pointing out that the Jianghe dialects also retain the glottal stop. The Language Atlas of China calls the remainder of Mandarin a supergroup, divided into 8 dialect groups distinguished by their treatment of the Middle Chinese entering tone, northeastern, spoken in the northeast of China, except the Liaodong Peninsula. This dialect is closely related to Standard Chinese, with little variation in lexicon and very few tonal differences. Beijing and environs, such as Xunda and Hebei. Beijing dialect forms the basis of Standard Chinese. Some people in areas of recent large-scale immigration, such as northern Xinjiang, speak the Beijing dialect or something very close to it. Jilu, spoken in Hebei and Shandong provinces, except the Jiaodong Peninsula, including Tianjin dialect. Tones and vocabulary are markedly different. In general, there is little intelligibility with Beijing Mandarin. Jiao, spoken in Shandong Peninsula and Liaodong Peninsula. Very noticeable tonal changes, different in flavor from Jilu Mandarin, but with more variance. There is significant, but not full intelligibility with Beijing Zongyuan, spoken in Henan Province, the central parts of Shaanxi and the Yellow River Valley, and southern Xinjiang. There are significant phonological differences, with partial intelligibility with Beijing. The Dungan language spoken in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan belongs to this group. Dungan speakers such as the poet Asa Shivaza have reported being understood by speakers of the Beijing dialect, but not vice versa. Lanyin, spoken in Gansu Province and Ningxia Autonomous Region, as well as northern Xinjiang. Jianghe, spoken in the parts of Jiangsu and Anhui on the north bank of the Yangtze, as well as some areas on the south bank, such as Nanjing and Jiangsu, Zhejiang and Jiangxi, etc. There are significant phonological and lexical changes to varied degrees, and intelligibility with Beijing is limited. Jianghe has been significantly influenced by Wu Chinese. Southwestern, spoken in the provinces of Hubei, Sichuan, Guizhou, Yunnan, and the Mandarin-speaking areas of Hunan, Guangxi and southern Shaanxi. There are sharp phonological, lexical, and tonal changes, and intelligibility with Beijing is limited to varying degrees. The atlas also includes several unclassified Mandarin dialects spoken in scattered pockets across southeastern China, such as Nanping and Fujian and Dongfang on Hainan. Phonology. Syllables consist maximally of an initial consonant, a glide, a vowel, a final, and tone. Not every syllable that is possible according to this rule actually exists in Mandarin, as there are rules prohibiting certain phonemes from appearing with others, and in practice there are only a few hundred distinct syllables. Phonological features that are generally shared by the Mandarin dialects include the palatalization of velars and alveolar sibilants when they occur before palatal glides, the disappearance of final plosives and the reduction of the 6 tones inherited from Middle Chinese after the tone split to 4 tones, the presence of retroflex consonants, the historical devoicing of plosives and sibilants. Initials. The maximal inventory of initials of a Mandarin dialect is as follows, with bracketed pinyin spellings given for those present in the standard language. Most Mandarin-speaking areas distinguish between the retroflex initials /tet a degree e/ from the apical sibilants /tstse degree s/, though they often have a different distribution than in the standard language. In many dialects of the northeast and southeast the retroflex initials have merged with the alveolar sibilants, so that z becomes xi, chi becomes psi, and she becomes si. The alveolopalatal sibilants /tetee degree e/ are the result of merger between the historical palatalized velars /kjk degree jxj/ and palatalized alveolar sibilants /tsj/tse degree jsj/. In about 20% of dialects, the alveolar sibilants fail to palatalize, remaining separate from the alveolopalatal initials. On the other side, in some dialects of eastern Shandong, the velar initials have failed to palatalize. Many southwestern Mandarin dialects mix and, substituting one for the other in some or all cases. For example, free to fly, and hui dust may be merged in these areas. In some dialects, initial and are not distinguished. In southwestern Mandarin, these sounds usually merge to. In Jianglei Mandarin, they usually merge to. People in many Mandarin-speaking areas may use different initial sounds where Beijing uses initial R. Common variants include /j, and. Some dialects have initial corresponding to the zero initial of the standard language. This initial is the result of a merger of the Middle Chinese zero initial with and. Many dialects of northwestern and central plains Mandarin have /pfa degree Fahrenheit v/ where Beijing has /tia degree WAE with. Examples include pig for standard ZE plus or minus, water for standard Shugi degree, soft for standard Rook northeast Y. Finals. Most Mandarin dialects have 3 medial glides, and, though their incidence varies, the medial is lost after apical initials in several areas. Thus southwestern Mandarin has right, where the standard language has dui. Southwestern Mandarin also has /kk degree ixi/ in some words where the standard has ja kie zai /tej degree jej/. This is a stereotypical feature of southwestern Mandarin, since it is so easily noticeable. For example, high shu for standard zai, Guy Street for standard jai. Mandarin dialects typically have relatively few vowels. Syllabic fricatives, as in standard zai and zi, are common in Mandarin dialects, though they also occur elsewhere. The Middle Chinese off-glides and are generally preserved in Mandarin dialects, yielding several diphthongs and triphthongs in contrast to the larger sets of monophthongs common in other dialect groups. The Middle Chinese coda was still present in Old Mandarin, but has merged within the modern dialects. In some areas final has also merged with. This is especially prevalent in the rhyme pairs n/eng/e unregistered trademark northeast/ and in/ing/in ear/. As a result, Jiao gold and Jiao capital merge in those dialects. The Middle Chinese final stops have undergone a variety of developments in different Mandarin dialects. In Jianghe dialects and some northwestern dialects they have merged as a final glottal stop. In other dialects they have been lost, with varying effects on the vowel. As a result, Beijing Mandarin and northeastern Mandarin underwent more vowel mergers than many other varieties of Mandarin. For example, coloring, a characteristic feature of Mandarin, works quite differently in the southwest. whereas Beijing dialect generally removes only a final or when adding the rhotic final r. In the southwest the a replaces nearly the entire rhyme. Tones. In general, no two Mandarin-speaking areas have exactly the same set of tone values, but most Mandarin-speaking areas have very similar tone distribution. For example, the dialects of Jinan, Xiand, Xian and so on all have four tones that correspond quite well to the Beijing tones of en, e microampere yen, e, and e lambda copyright. The exception to this rule lies in the distribution of syllables formally ending in a stop consonant, which are treated differently in different dialects of Mandarin. Middle Chinese stops and Affricates had a three-way distinction between Tanui, voiceless aspirate and voiced consonants. In Mandarin dialects the voicing is generally lost, yielding voiceless aspirates in syllables with a Middle Chinese level tone and non-aspirates as other syllables. Of the four tones of Middle Chinese, the level, rising and departing tones have also developed into four modern tones in a uniform way across Mandarin dialects. The Middle Chinese level tone has split into two registers, conditioned on voicing of the Middle Chinese initial, while rising tone syllables with voiced obstruent initials have shifted to the departing tone. The following examples from the standard language illustrate the regular development common to Mandarin dialects. In traditional Chinese phonology, syllables that ended in a stop in Middle Chinese were considered to belong to a special category known as the entering tone. These final stops have disappeared in most Mandarin dialects, with the syllables distributed over the other four modern tones in different ways in the various Mandarin subgroups. In the Beijing dialect that underlies the standard language, syllables beginning with original voiceless consonants were redistributed across the four tones in a completely random pattern. For example, the three characters C centimeter ishi to the first, all tsjek in Middle Chinese, are now pronounced ja, jc and ja respectively. Older dictionaries such as Matthew's China C Euro-English Dictionary mark characters whose pronunciation formally ended with a plosive with a superscript 5. However, this tone number is more commonly used for syllables that always have a neutral tone. In Jiangui dialects, a minority of southwestern dialects and Jin, former final plosives were not deleted entirely, but were reduced to a glottal stop. This development is shared with the non-Mandarin Wu dialects, and is thought to represent the pronunciation of Old Mandarin. In line with traditional Chinese phonology, dialects such as Jiangui and Menjiang are thus said to have 5 tones instead of 4. However, modern linguistics considers these syllables as having no phonemic tone at all. While the system of tones is common across Mandarin dialects, their realization as tone contours varies widely. Dialects in and around the Nantong area typically have many more than 4 tones, due to influence from the neighboring Wu dialects. Mandarin dialects frequently employ neutral tones in the second syllables of words, creating syllables whose tone contour is so short and light that it is difficult or impossible to discriminate. These atonal syllables also occur in non-Mandarin dialects, but in many southern dialects the tones of all syllables are made clear. Vocabulary. There are more polysyllabic words in Mandarin than in all other major varieties of Chinese except Shanghainese. This is partly because Mandarin has undergone many more sound changes than have southern varieties of Chinese, and has needed to deal with many more homophones. New words have been formed by adding affixes such as lao, zai, e, r, and tu, or by compounding, for example by combining 2 words of similar meaning as in ka and gmang, made from elements meaning hurried, and busy. A distinctive feature of southwestern Mandarin is its frequent use of noun reduplication, which is hardly used in Beijing. In Sichuan, one hears bao bao handbag, where Beijing uses buoa. There are also a small number of words that have been polysyllabic since Old Chinese, such as hard die copyright butterfly. The singular pronouns in Mandarin are wci, ncu, now nu, and ta hate, with men added for the plural. Further, there is a distinction between the plural first-person pronoun za and men, which is inclusive of the listener, and ๊mænd, which may be exclusive of the listener. Dialects of Mandarin agree with each other quite consistently on these pronouns. while the first and second person singular pronouns are cognate with forms in other varieties of Chinese. The rest of the pronominal system is a Mandarin innovation. Because of contact with Mongolian and Manchurian peoples, Mandarin has some loan words from these languages not present in other varieties of Chinese, such as ha-ta squared ngle. Southern Chinese varieties have borrowed from Thai, Austroasiatic, and Austronesian languages. In general, the greatest variation occurs in slang, in kinship terms, in names for common crops and domesticated animals, for common verbs and adjectives, and other such everyday terms. The least variation occurs in formal vocabulary Euro terms dealing with science, law, or government. Grammar. Chinese varieties of all periods have traditionally been considered prime examples of analytic languages, relying on word order and particles instead of inflection or affixes to provide grammatical information such as person, number, tense, mood, or case. Although modern varieties, including the Mandarin dialects, use a small number of particles in a similar fashion to suffixes, they are still strongly analytic. The basic word order of subjecta verb object is common across Chinese dialects, but there are variations in the order of the two objects of ditransitive sentences. In northern dialects the indirect object precedes the direct object, for example in the standard Chinese sentence. In southern dialects, as well as many southwestern and Guānhuà dialects, the objects occur in the reverse order. Most varieties of Chinese use post-verbal particles to indicate aspect, but the particles used vary. Most Mandarin dialects use the particle li to indicate the perfective aspect and zi for the progressive aspect. Other Chinese varieties tend to use different particles, for example Cantonese zhou tu-a, and Gantu si section respectively. The experiential aspect particle guo is used more widely, except in southern Min. The subordinative particle d is characteristic of Mandarin dialects. Some southern dialects, and a few Guānhuà dialects, preserve an older pattern of subordination without a marking particle, while in others a classifier fulfills the role of the Mandarin particle. Especially in conversational Chinese, sentence final particles alter the inherent meaning of a sentence. Like much vocabulary, particles can vary a great deal with regards to the locale. For example, the particle ma, which is used in most northern dialects to denote obviousness or contention, is replaced by yo in southern usage. See also, Chinese dictionary, transcription into Chinese characters, written Chinese, list of languages by number of native speakers, notes. References. Works cited, Bloom, Susan Deborah, Portraits of Primitives Ordering Humankinds in the Chinese Nation, Rowman and Littlefield, ISBN A978-0-7425-0092-1. Coblin, W. South, A Brief History of Mandarin, Journal of the American Oriental Society 120, 537 a €552, JSTORA 606615 a Robert Morrison in the Phonology of Mid-Qang Mandarin, Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland 13, 339. A 355, doi, 10.1017 per second 1356186303003134. Eshker, Genevia Vey, Creole and Dialect Continua, Standard Acquisition Processes in Belize and China, John Benjamins, ISBN A978-90-272-5240-1. Kask, Elizabeth, The Politics of Language in Chinese Education, 1895 1919, Brill, ISBN A978-90-04-16367-6. Kirpaska, Maria, Chinese Language, S. A Look Through the Prism of the Great Dictionary of Modern Chinese Dialects, Walter de Guita, ISBN A978-3-11-021914-2. Meyer, Victor H., What is a Chinese Dialect Topolect? Reflections on some key Sino-English linguistic terms, Sino-Platonic Papers 29, 1 a €31. Norman, Jerry, Chinese, Cambridge University Press, ISBN A978-0-521-29653-3. Ramsey, S. Robert, The Languages of China, Princeton University Press, ISBN A978-0-691-01468-5. Richards, John F., The Unending Frontier, An Environmental History of the Early Modern World, University of California Press, ISBN A978-0-520-23075-0. Worm, Stephen Adolph. Lee, Rong. Bowman, Theo. Lee, Mary W., Language Atlas of China, Longman, ISBN A972-962-359-085-3. Yan, Margaret Meehan, Introduction to Chinese Dialectology, Lincom Europa, ISBN A978-3-89586-629-6. Yu, Anno, Chinese Dialects, Grammar, in Thurgood, Graham. LaPolla, Randy J., The Sino-Tibetan Languages, Routledge, ppA 84/125, ISBN A978-0-7007-1129-1. Zhang, Benon. Yang, Robin R., Putongwa Education and Language Policy in Post-Colonial Hong Kong, in Zhou, Minglang, Language Policy in the People's Republic of China, Theory and Practice since 1949, Kluwer Academic Publishers, ppA 143/161, ISBN A978-1-4020-8038-8. Further reading, Dwyer, Ariane M., From the Northwest China Sprachbund, Zhao Nhua Chinese Dialect Data, UN Ren Society Treasury of Chinese Dialect Data 1, 143/182. Novotná, ZDENKA, Contributions to the Study of Loanwords and Hybrid Words in Modern Chinese, Archive Orienta LNA 35, 613/649. Shen, Zhongwei Squared A 1/4 Y, The Origin of Mandarin, Journal of Chinese Linguistics 39, 1/31. Historical Western Language Texts, Greiner, Adam, Western Mandarin, or the Spoken Language of Western China, with syllabic and English indexes, Shanghai, American Presbyterian Mission Press. Mateer, Calvin Wilson, A Course of Mandarin Lessons, based on idiom, Shanghai, American Presbyterian Mission Press. External links, Tones in Mandarin Dialects are comprehensive. Tone comparison charts for 523 Mandarin dialects. A Euro Internet Archive Mirror.